Hey guys! Tonight we drift quietly into the cool, damp dawn of a city that floats not in a fairy tale or science fiction story, but in history. The air smells of wet earth and wood smoke, and faint mist curls across the surface of a massive lake. You can hear it, a soft lapping of water against wooden boats, a paddle dipping, the creak of distant canoes. This is Tenochtitlán, the capital of the Aztec Empire, a city on water. And you're standing right on the edge of one of the most unusual farming systems the world has ever seen, the chinampa. No, not a floating farm like a fancy modern hydroponic setup with solar panels and a brand partnership. This is dirt, stinky lake muck, hand-woven reed mats, trees planted in mud that may or may not float, and somehow it works. These gardens don't just stay afloat, they thrive. You can't help but squint out at them, strips of green stretching into the mist, each one a small raft of food, stitched together with sticks and roots and prayer. You're here before the tourists, before the street vendors, before the megaphones and selfie sticks. In this moment, it's just you and the cool breath of the lake, and the distant splash of a fish jumping somewhere it shouldn't be. You probably won't survive this, not just because life in the Aztec world was, let's say, less than safety regulated, but because this garden isn't just beautiful. It's necessary. If you mess up your harvest, people starve. If your chinampa breaks free of its moorings and floats into the wrong canal, your neighbors yell at you. If the gods are unhappy, well, let's just say there are temples for that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling generous, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is over there. I love seeing how far this sleepy little garden of ours can reach. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a series of slick wooden planks laid between patches of marshy water. The early sun glows like polished obsidian in the sky, and the air hums with insects. You're not in the city proper yet. You're at the edges, the in-between zones where solid land starts to give up and water begins to win. And that's where this story really starts with a problem. The Aztecs, clever as they were, had a classic case of terrible real estate. When they arrived in the Valley of Mexico in the 14th century, most of the good land had already been claimed by other city-states. So, like anyone forced to rent in a bad neighborhood, they made do. They picked a swampy island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, surrounded by brackish water, mosquitoes the size of raisins, and about 3 square feet of dry dirt. Historians still argue whether this location was strategic, spiritual, or just the only thing left on Zillow. You, in your too thin sandals, are trying to imagine how you'd grow anything here. The soil is unstable, the water's full of salt, and every time you try to dig, your shovel makes a sad squelch. And yet, these people somehow built an empire here. The secret: don't fight the swamp. Farm the swamp. You start to notice them now, those odd green rectangles rising out of the water. They're not random. They're organized, patterned, purposeful. Each one is a chinampa, a man-made plot of farmland built by staking out a section of shallow lake, weaving a perimeter of reeds or wattle fencing, then filling it with mud, silt, decaying vegetation, and dreams. It's a little like composting, but without the TikTok tutorials. And while it might not sound glamorous, these gardens are astonishingly productive. They can yield up to 7 crops per year. 7. That's more than most modern farms. You squat down, dip your fingers in the soil, and realize this stuff is alive. It's squishy, yes, but also full of warmth and energy and nutrients. A living mattress for corn, beans, squash, and amaranth. There's a man nearby, his canoe nudging the edge of one chinampa. He's old, with a wide straw hat and calloused hands. He waves at you lazily and gestures to the rows of crops he's tending. They're almost luminous in the morning light. Tomatoes spill like rubies. Chilies hang in clusters like red punctuation marks. Everything is absurdly, aggressively green. You paddle closer, yes. You're in a canoe now. Walking isn't really an option here, and realize the whole lake is crisscrossed with canals. It's like a floating maze, a water-based street grid. The Aztecs didn't just build gardens, they built neighborhoods on water. Some chinampas even have tiny shrines at the corner. You pass one with a little clay statue of Xochipilli, god of flowers and song, tucked between two rows of marigolds. He grins at you as if he knows your dreams. And maybe he does, because as your boat drifts, rocked by the soft waves and framed by the silhouette of distant volcanoes, your thoughts begin to soften. You feel the rhythm of ancient hands layering mud, weaving reeds, planting seeds. You feel how this garden grew not just from need, but from beauty, from adaptation, from sheer stubborn human creativity. Someone nearby sings a lullaby while planting chives. A heron watches you suspiciously from a willow tree, and you visitor from the future can't help but think this is the weirdest, quietest miracle you've ever seen. You lean back in the canoe and close your eyes. Just for a second, the lake breathes beneath you. Somewhere, a tomato drops gently into the water. You open your eyes again to a sky that's brightened just a little. The mist is lifting, revealing more of the watery world around you. And what a world it is! A checkerboard of green and blue, stitched together by canoes, trees, and faith. But none of the productivity, the peace, or the tomatoes would exist if the Aztecs hadn't figured out how to make the most of a place no one else wanted. This lake, it wasn't exactly real estate gold. The Valley of Mexico was a high-altitude basin surrounded by mountains, with several interconnected lakes in the center, most of them shallow, salty, or swampy. Lake Texcoco, the largest, was a seasonal mood ring of mudflats and brackish water, not ideal for growing corn or hosting barbecues. So, why settle here at all? Well, legend says the Aztecs were guided by prophecy. Their wandering ancestors, the Mexica, had been told to build their city where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus with a snake in its beak, which sounds poetic until you realize that exact vision showed up on a small, soggy island in the middle of a mosquito-ridden lake. Most people would have looked around and said, "Absolutely not," but the Mexica said, "Perfect," and they started building. Of course, building anything here meant dealing with everything. Swamps, floods, soft ground that swallowed structures like soggy cereal. You try to imagine it hauling stones through chest-deep muck, trying to lay foundations in quicksand. It's like trying to build a castle on pudding. Historians still debate whether the Aztecs truly chose the site or were forced into it by stronger rivals. Either way, they made it work, and their first stroke of genius chinampas. You reach down and run your fingers along the edge of a garden, now more clearly visible. It's about 30 feet wide and maybe 100 feet long, framed by a woven fence of sticks and reeds. There's a willow tree at each corner, its roots dipping into the water like toes. The whole structure floats, but not like a raft. It's semi-anchored, semi-suspended. Less like a boat, more like a thick lasagna of natural materials that eventually merges with the lake bed. You paddle gently alongside a chinampero, one of the farmers, and watch as he builds a new bed. First, he drives stakes into the shallow lake, outlining a rectangle. Then he weaves a fence between them, basket style. Into that frame, he shovels layers of lake mud, water plants, animal dung, and dead vegetation. It's messy. It smells suspiciously like low-tide meets compost bin. But over time, the mess settles into something stable, something fertile. You're not above helping. You grab a crude paddle and try stirring the muck. It squelches like the world's worst soup, but as you layer more material on top, something amazing happens. The pile grows firmer, drier, warmer, almost garden-like. In a few days, with more layers and sunshine, this gooey rectangle will sprout its first beans. It's like farming meets papier-mâché. And it works. Chinampas produce at an astonishing rate. They don't just sit passively, they generate their own microclimate. The water below moderates temperature. The organic matter enriches the soil, and the proximity to canals ensures constant irrigation. Some scholars even argue that chinampas might be the most productive agricultural system per square meter in human history. Of course, the Aztecs didn't figure this out overnight. They likely adapted the method from earlier cultures in the region, like the Xochimilca and the Teotihuacanos. You can almost hear the conversations between generations. No in our son, more duck poop. You always forget the duck poop. By now, you're drifting between several chinampas, each at a different stage of construction. Some are freshly laid, still slick and steaming. Others are fully mature, bursting with corn, squash vines, and morning glories. The contrast is almost comical. One plot looks like a swampy science experiment, the next like a wedding centerpiece. As you float, you notice something unexpected. These gardens are alive not just with plants, but with sound. Farmers sing to themselves. Children play on narrow mud paths. Frogs croak rhythmically, as if hired to provide ambient lake jazz. This isn't just farming. It's life-soggy, labor-intensive, glorious life. You pass a small shrine where someone has left offerings maybe to Tlaloc, the rain god, a couple of chili peppers, a clay figure, a coin. It's hard to tell whether it's religious devotion or a farmer's superstition. Maybe both. After all, when your survival depends on a floating pile of mud, you hedge your bets. There's also a practical side to these plots. With land so scarce, the Aztecs built their farms on the water, expanding their usable space without invading other territories. It was brilliant urban planning by necessity. The city of Tenochtitlán itself grew into a kind of semi-aquatic metropolis, canals instead of streets, footbridges instead of avenues, and vegetables never more than a paddle away. Still, you can't help but imagine the occasional mishap, a chinampa breaking loose, a startled farmer waking up to find his carrots halfway to the next neighborhood, or some smug neighbor floating by, pointing at your droopy corn and saying, "You really should be using more duckweed mulch." As you pass under a low bridge, willow branches brushing your face, you realize something else: these gardens are stubborn. They survive through saltwater encroachment, seasonal floods, pests, even political collapse. They are, quite literally, the root of Aztec life. Without chinampas, there would be no food. Without food, no empire. And yet, they're also humble. They don't tower like pyramids or shimmer like gold jewelry. They don't require blood sacrifice or elaborate ceremony. They just float, feed, continue. The wind picks up slightly, rippling the surface of the water. A dragonfly lands on your arm, bold and iridescent. You flick it off gently and glance up at the volcano on the horizon, Popocatépetl, standing like a silent god. Somewhere behind you, a farmer chuckles and calls out in Nahuatl. You don't understand the words, but you get the tone. Slow down. Let the garden do the talking. And so you do. You trail your fingers in the water as the canoe glides onward, the lake mirroring puffy clouds and drifting reeds. Around you, the chinampas rise like green rafts, calm and orderly. But how exactly are they built? What's holding them together? Because frankly, they look a bit too floaty to be real. You decide to stop and investigate. At the edge of one partially constructed chinampa, a young farmer is knee-deep in the shallows, grunting softly as he hoists armloads of lake muck and dead plants into a half-finished plot. You wade in too. Why not? The water's warm, squishy, and smells like yesterday's salad after 3 days in the sun. A little earthy, a little offensive. The farmer nods at you and points to the structure. It begins, he explains, with a basic wooden frame. Picture a large rectangle outlined with stakes hammered into the soft lake bed. Between those stakes, reeds are woven tightly to form walls, a bit like building a basket the size of a minibus. Once that fence is up, in goes the good stuff. Alternating layers of lake bottom silt, decomposing vegetation, aquatic plants, and the occasional handful of kitchen scraps. The process is slow, messy, and absolutely vital. You help toss a bundle of rotting reeds into the pile and watch it slop down into place like it belongs. It's basically lasagna farming. Each layer adds more stability, more nutrients, more height. After a few weeks, the mass begins to firm up. The top layer is carefully leveled and, finally, planted with seedlings beans, maize, squash, sometimes even flowers. You eye one chinampa that's half vegetables and half gladiolus. It's like a salad bar, and a florist had a waterlogged baby. But here's the question. How do these things not just float off into the horizon? That's where the magic comes in, if you can call willow trees magic, which you should. Each chinampa is anchored at the corners with ahuejote trees, a native species similar to willow. You look over and spot one of them now tall, silver green, roots drinking directly from the water. They grow fast, provide shade, and most importantly, their roots intertwine with the chinampa's structure and the lake bed, knitting the whole garden into place. Some of these trees are centuries old, still standing, still quietly holding things together. You sit beside one and lean against its trunk. It's sturdy, cool. It smells of leaf and thyme. The tree seems to whisper, "I've seen so much mud. You have no idea." Historians still argue whether this method was invented independently by the Aztecs or refined from earlier Mesoamerican cultures. The truth is murky, like everything in this lake. Some scholars credit the Xochimilcas, who arrived in the region earlier and had similar practices. Others believe the Aztecs scaled the system to something far greater. Either way, what matters is that the chinampa worked and still does. You scoop up a handful of soil from one chinampa and rub it between your fingers. It's dark, rich, and impossibly soft. This is the real gold of the Aztec Empire, not the shiny stuff in temples. This dirt, this muck, this stinking miracle of decomposition. Nearby, a pair of children are planting beans. They giggle as they drop seeds into tiny holes and pat them down with the flat of their hands. You watch the rhythm of it poke, drop, pat. It's mesmerizing, meditative. You can see why some farmers refer to their chinampas like old friends or old gods. The water laps at your ankles. A breeze picks up and rustles the trees. Everything here is in motion, but nothing seems rushed. The lake does not hurry. The crops do not panic. The soil takes its time. You breathe with it. You float back toward the center of the chinampa zone, and suddenly the view changes. From above, you can now see how organized it all is. Dozens, hundreds of green rectangles fanned out across the lake in near-perfect grids. Between them, narrow canals just wide enough for a canoe. It's like looking at a giant water-bound chessboard. You half expect the corn to start moving in L shapes. And it's not just aesthetic, it's functional. The canals serve as irrigation channels, transportation routes, and buffers during seasonal floods. In dry months, you can scoop water from the canal and pour it directly onto your crops. In rainy months, the canals protect the gardens from drowning. It's a built-in climate control system with zero electricity and zero instruction manuals. You pull up beside another chinampero who's planting squash vines along the edges of his plot. He waves you over and explains something interesting: the three sisters, maize, beans, and squash, planted together in companion planting. The corn grows tall, the beans climb the corn, and the squash spreads low. shading the soil and preventing weeds. It's agriculture by teamwork, nature's version of a well-balanced group project. You try planting a few seeds yourself, the soil resists, then gives in. It accepts you. There's something oddly comforting about the whole setup. It's not perfect. There are bugs, the occasional hungry bird, and the constant threat of storms, but it's resilient, organic in every sense, and quietly brilliant. You glance down at your muddy feet. Somehow, you've become part of the system, another moving piece in the grand, damp machine. In the distance, smoke rises gently from the city. Someone's cooking tamales. Somewhere, a priest lights incense at the top of a pyramid, and here you are, knee-deep in lake mud, planting beans next to a willow tree like it's the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it is. The sun hangs higher now, casting a golden shimmer across the lake. You squint through the light at a row of towering trees, more of those ahuejotes, the lake willows, and marvel at their straight backs and whispering leaves. They seem almost sentient, like ancient guardians of this bobbing, fertile world. You guide your canoe along the edge of a chinampa bordered by them. Their roots are thick and sinuous, winding down through the muck like fingers, gripping the chinampa and the lake bed both. It's the kind of grip you develop after decades of standing still while the world floats around you. This is how the Aztecs tethered their dreams. Without these trees, every garden here would drift aimlessly with the breeze or collapse with the weight of a good rain. The trees do double duty, acting as anchors and as shade. Their tall canopies filter sunlight, cooling the crops below and preventing water evaporation. You rest in that shade for a moment, your arms draped over the sides of the canoe, the water lapping gently against the hull. A frog burps somewhere nearby. The lake is always talking, just quietly. You imagine yourself as an Aztec farmer. Maybe your name is something solid and poetic, like Chimalpopoca or Itzcuintli. You wake up before sunrise. You paddle to your chinampa, shoulders stiff from the night, the air crisp. You tend to your trees first because they're your stability, your history, your home's literal foundation. You water them. You talk to them. And in a weird, whispery way, they talk back. Historians still argue whether the ahuejotes were chosen for their roots or their symbolic presence, or both. Some say the trees even served as territorial markers, dividing one farmer's chinampa from another. You eye a particularly large one with scars in its bark, maybe cut by a blade, or by time. Its roots pulse out into the water like veins. This isn't just a tree. This is infrastructure, sacred infrastructure. Around the base of one tree, someone has placed a ring of small clay figurines, probably offerings, maybe just a child's game. In Aztec tradition, trees could be spiritually potent, especially those that bridged worlds. And a tree with roots in water, trunk in earth, and branches in air. That's a cosmic ladder, right there. You duck under a low branch as your canoe slips alongside a particularly lush chinampa. This one's a show-off. Thick rows of maize, sunflowers beaming like smug little suns. Even the beans look pleased with themselves. The farmer here is elderly, her back hunched, but her movements precise. She moves like someone who knows exactly how deep to plant each seed, how moist the soil should feel under bare feet. And when the birds are lying to her about the weather, she nods at you, then gestures to the willow trunk behind her, where dozens of clay pots hang from rope hooks. Inside each compost, seed stock, maybe even dried herbs. The tree, again, isn't just decoration, it's the pantry. You take a moment to appreciate the symmetry. The tree stabilizes the chinampa, nourishes the soil, stores your tools, shelters your lunch, marks your boundary, and according to more than a few whispered tales, sometimes answers your prayers. Try getting that from a tomato steak. You drift again, lazy now, the water almost hypnotic in its rhythm. The willow branches trail across the surface like fingers drawing stories. You pass by a chinampa under construction and notice something peculiar at each corner. The builders are already planting tiny willow saplings, not waiting until the soil is packed or the crops are ready. No, they start with the trees. Always. First things rooted, then things growing. That's the order of this world. It's more than practical. It's a mindset. Root first, float second. And these trees, some of them, anyway, have outlived their builders. There are ahuejotes still standing in Xochimilco today, believed to be descendants of those planted by Aztec hands over 500 years ago. You might be leaning against the great-great-great-grandparent of a tree that once shaded a chinampero, whispering his worries to the wind. The idea stirs something in you. Maybe it's the sun. Maybe it's the way the lake reflects the sky until you're not sure which way is up. Maybe it's the soft rustle of leaves telling you that humans aren't supposed to build to last forever, but trees might. You run your hand along the trunk of one. Feel its age in the texture of its bark. It doesn't speak exactly, but it does exude a kind of patience. These trees don't chase anything. They don't perform. They just hold. And sometimes that's enough. Further along the shore, you see a small group planting a new chinampa. It's a community project. Maybe. You hear jokes being passed back and forth. Someone's elbow deep in mud. Another person's clearly pretending to help while doing nothing. Even in the middle of a lake, some dynamics never change. They plant the saplings first. Of course they do. You're invited to help, so you leap from the canoe and squish your way to the edge. They hand you a thin branch, wet, green, still breathing. You jab it into the soft perimeter of the garden in progress. And there it stands. Your little piece of permanence. A future anchor. In a few years, someone else will lean against it, or hang a clay pot from it, or whisper to it, and it'll still be here, just holding. You step back into the canoe. The others wave. The water carries you on. Somewhere, the willow trees are whispering again. You don't speak their language, but you're starting to get the gist. You've gotten used to the rhythm now, the slow rocking of the canoe, the way your paddle dips into the water with a soft plop, then slices forward like a spoon through soup. Around you, the chinampas stretch on quiet, green, productive. Each one a tiny island of effort. But let's talk about what's actually growing here. Because this isn't some wild, overgrown patch of swampy vegetables. No, your chinampa is a perfectly organized floating grocery store, rows and rows of edible abundance, all within arm's reach. Tomatoes like drops of fire, chilies that twitch in the sun like sleeping lizards, fat beans that clink softly as you pluck them, and everywhere, maize. It's hard to overstate how important maize is. It's not just a crop, it's a philosophy. It's what people are made of, literally, at least according to Aztec mythology. In one version of the creation story, humans are sculpted from maize dough. So, yes, you're technically made of tamales. Deep down, we all are. You park your canoe beside a mature chinampa and hop onto its springy soil. A young farmer gestures for you to follow, and you trail behind as they walk the rows. Their sandals squish slightly in the soft earth. They're humming something rhythmic and slightly off-key, like a lullaby written by someone who didn't quite pass music class but still believes in singing. They crouch beside a cluster of green tomatoes and start plucking them gently, dropping them into a woven basket. You join in. The leaves are sticky with a musky, vegetal scent, sun-warmed and sharp. The fruits are firm, not yet red, but they'll ripen in transit. That's how these chinamperos do it. Harvest in the morning, paddle to the market by afternoon, sell before the sun sets. Because here's the thing, these gardens don't just feed households, they feed cities. Entire districts of Tenochtitlán rely on this produce. You're not just picking a salad, You're participating in an economic system older than many nations. Historians estimate that chinampas supplied food for tens, possibly hundreds, of thousands of people. That's bananas. Well, not bananas. They didn't grow those here, but you get the point. Every inch of space is used smartly. Lettuce fills the gaps between bean mounds. Squash vines creep out to the sides, shading the soil. Even the canal edges serve a purpose. Wild herbs like epazote grow there naturally, ready to spice up someone's stew. You pause to sip water from a gourd and spot a small patch of cempasúchil marigolds planted near the edge. Not food, but important. These orange flowers are used in festivals, especially the Day of the Dead. Even in a garden meant to feed the living, the dead are gently remembered. Your guide leads you to another patch, this one full of amaranth. The little magenta plumes sway in the breeze like tasseled dancers. You break off a piece and rub it between your fingers, watching the tiny seeds scatter like sand. Amaranth was a staple food here, packed with protein. It's making a comeback now, thanks to modern health food trends, but to the Aztecs, it was already a superfood, no chia needed. And then you see the flowers. Bright, unnecessary, glorious flowers. There are dahlias, Mexico's national flower, blooming like fireworks. There are roses and lilies and even a few wild orchids clinging to a trellis made of driftwood. You blink because it's hard to reconcile the idea of a floating vegetable patch and a boutique florist living in harmony. But here it is. Turns out chinampas weren't just utilitarian. They were beautiful. Farmers often grew flowers alongside crops, not just for sale, but for ceremonies, rituals, and a bit of personal joy. Imagine weeding your garden with sore hands and a sunburn, and then turning your head to see a row of sunflowers smiling at you. You'd keep going too. You help carry a few baskets back to the canoe. They're heavy, not with weight, exactly, but with density with life. Each fruit, each root, a little miracle pulled from mud and sweat and timing. Nearby, you hear the slap of paddles and see another farmer pulling up to a chinampa. His canoe is already full squash blossoms. Bundles of greens, shiny red chilies. He nods at you, then carefully begins unloading his haul, sorting the goods for tomorrow's market run. He talks to his crops like old friends. "You'd better behave overnight," he murmurs to a stubborn bunch of chard. You're learning that farming here isn't just labor, it's personality. These gardens reflect their keepers. Some are neat, rows as straight as rulers. Others are wild, chaotic tangles of genius. You pass one chinampa where a cat is lounging in a pumpkin patch like it owns the place. It probably does. You sit for a moment and take it all in. The scent of basil on the breeze, the way the sun bounces off the water and glows through the maize like stained glass, the quiet satisfaction in the farmer's face as he surveys his work. This is the floating grocery store of the Aztecs. But it's also more than that. It's a floating life store. Food, flowers, memories, rituals, identity, all rooted in mud and floating on dreams. You paddle away slowly. Your canoe low in the water now with the weight of vegetables. Somewhere ahead, the canals will open into the marketplace, and the city will wake to the sound of breakfast being paddled into place. But for now, it's just you and your floating farm. A quiet place, a productive place, a place that feeds not just the body, but the soul. The canoe rocks gently as you push away from the last chinampa, its roots fading into the background like the final notes of a song. Ahead, a narrow canal snakes between lush rows of farmland, and the soft slap of your paddle is the only sound for a while. Until, of course, you hear the scream. Not a human scream. A high-pitched, startled yelp, followed by a tremendous splash. You round the bend and come face to snout with one of the lesser-discussed hazards of Aztec agriculture crocodiles. Okay, technically, Caimans or large amphibious reptiles that don't exactly have publicist-approved species names, whatever they were real enough to inspire caution. And, occasionally, terror. You freeze. The water ripples where the creature vanished. Somewhere to your left, a heron cackles unhelpfully. You're not sure if it's laughing or warning you. You paddle a little faster now. Because working on a chinampa isn't all sunshine and squash blossoms. These are real ecosystems. After all, swampy, buzzing, waterlogged homes to all manner of critters, frogs, eels, snakes, biting insects, and, yes, the occasional snap-happy predator. You glance over the edge of the boat and spot a long ripple trailing under the surface. Nope. Back to the garden. You dock at a new chinampa and are immediately greeted by a different kind of danger manure. Specifically, what you strongly suspect is human manure. It's in large ceramic containers lined along the edge of the garden like an army of stink bombs. Because this floating paradise, it's powered by poop. Aztec waste management was surprisingly advanced. They didn't have indoor plumbing, but they did have a system. Public toilets over canals, night soil collectors, poop barges. Yes, literal poop barges. Canoes full of compostable waste paddled gently each morning through these very canals, delivering fertilizer to the hungry chinampas. You lean in to inspect a large clay vessel and immediately regret it. The smell hits like a historical brick to the face. Still, it's efficient, sustainable, circular economy, 1400 style. And don't think the Aztecs stopped with just human waste. Animal dung, composted plant material, decomposed lake weeds, everything organic was scooped, dried, mixed, and applied. They even used tezontle, a kind of porous volcanic rock ground into the soil to help with drainage and aeration. Historians still argue whether this level of agricultural sophistication developed independently or evolved from earlier Mesoamerican practices. But one thing's clear, these people knew their compost. And they weren't just feeding plants, they were feeding soil. You kneel and dig your fingers into a nearby mound. It's warm, alive. Earthworms twitch lazily and disappear back into the dark. You feel, oddly, like you're touching memory itself. Another chinampero appears beside you, this one younger and full of nervous energy. He grins, jabs a thumb toward his compost pile, and says something in Nahuatl that probably translates to, "Pretty gross." Huh? You both laugh. He then scoops a little into a bowl and spreads it delicately along the base of his beans. It's almost reverent, like feeding a baby, a really smelly baby. Later, you help him paddle a manure canoe out to the larger canal. You keep a respectable distance from the cargo. The canoe wobbles under the weight of its fragrant load, but the water is calm, and the young farmer hums a little tune as he guides you along. As you float, you notice small platforms connected to the chinampas, raised wooden walkways and collection bins, where waste is sorted, dried, and aged before use. It's not just slapped on and hoped for the best. It's monitored, mixed, rotated. It's science by instinct. You pause beneath a low bridge. A group of children dart across it, one trailing a long ribbon and shouting something gleeful about ducks. You look up and spot a flock of ducks cruising along the canal's edge, dipping occasionally for bugs and tiny fish. Some farmers kept ducks and turkeys in pens near their chinampas, not just for eggs or meat, but for pest control. The ducks do the weeding, so you don't have to. Natural lawn mowers, waddling in quack formation. You smile at the cleverness of it. Ducks, poop, trees, crops, every element in balance. This is a closed-loop system centuries before eco-friendly became a marketing phrase. You paddle back toward the chinampa with the younger farmer and help him finish fertilizing his rows. The sun's higher now, and the air smells, let's be honest, a bit like warm compost tea. But it's oddly comforting, like something working exactly as intended. You rest under a willow again, watching a dragonfly dart through sunbeams. The light scatters on the water, dappled and soft. Somewhere nearby, someone's playing a wooden flute. The notes rise and fall like the breeze light, aimless, perfect. And it hits you all this is deliberate. Every canoe stroke, every seed placement, every shovel of muck. It's not improvised, not accidental. It's architecture, just not the kind with bricks. These chinampas are systems living, floating, growing systems, designed not for show, but for survival. And in that survival, they've become beautiful. You close your eyes and breathe in the warm, earthy air. It's not perfume, it's not sterile, it's honest. And beneath it all, water, mud, life. The midday sun has arrived, pouring down like warm honey across the chinampas. You're sweating now, glistening slightly, and questioning your earlier enthusiasm for canoeing between piles of compost. But you press on, because there's still more to discover in this floating maze of vegetables and rituals. Up ahead, a farmer waves you over with a grin and points at a particularly tidy patch of land. You dock the canoe and step out onto the chinampa, half expecting to sink. But the soil is springy and firm, the result of generations of careful layering and maintenance. This one is an older plot, possibly centuries old in origin, still in use, and right now, it's being prepped for a crop change. You notice the careful clearing of one section corn has just been harvested. Nearby, small green beans and squash plants are already starting to take root. This isn't random. This is crop rotation in action. You watch as the farmer explains mostly in gestures, a little in broken Spanish, how each plant leaves behind or draws out different nutrients. Corn drinks deeply from the soil, especially nitrogen. Beans, on the other hand, fix nitrogen back into it. Squash covers the ground and suppresses weeds. It's a slow dance of chemistry. Knowledge passed down through stories, dirt under fingernails, and a really good sense of timing. And the timing matters. Chinampa farmers don't get to rest after harvest. The second crop is already waiting, and sometimes a third. These gardens can produce multiple harvests per year, 2, 3, even 4, if the gods are in a good mood and you're willing to sleep very little. You lean over the row and help tuck in a young bean plant. The soil is warm and crumbly, alive with the secret activity of insects, bacteria, and whatever microbe is responsible for making your hands smell like ancient lake bottom. It's messy, but it works. You're handed a long wooden stick with carved notches along the side. A planting guide. The notches indicate where to poke holes for seeds at even spacing. Low tech. Sure, but weirdly precise. The kind of thing that comes from centuries of trial, error, and saying, "Let's never do that again." Nearby, another chinampa is being left to rest. Its soil is being raked, its surface cleared. You're told this plot is sleeping. The idea is simple but smart every few seasons. You let the land breathe. You paddle nutrients in. You let natural growth happen. You restore the plot instead of squeezing it dry. Historians still argue whether this technique evolved purely from observation or if it carried some religious aspect too, letting the land, like people, take time to heal. But either way, the effect is the same sustainability. You begin to notice patterns now. Every chinampa has its own rhythm. Some are dominated by maize, some lean into leafy greens. A few are flower-heavy ornamentals for temples or market sale. And while the layout may vary, the underlying logic is always the same. Don't waste anything. Don't exhaust the earth, and never, ever underestimate the intelligence of soil. As you walk further, the canal widens slightly and the trees grow denser. You pass under a woven arch of branches and find yourself in a shaded rest area, a kind of communal spot between chinampas. There's a flat space for sitting, baskets of snacks, and a woven mat where someone's napping with a straw hat over their face. You sit quietly beside them, nibbling on a piece of roasted corn handed to you earlier. It's sweet, nutty, and still warm from the sun. It's not just fuel, it's the taste of this whole system, wrapped in one bite. A farmer across the way sings softly while scattering crushed eggshells into a planting row. Another hums as he adds ground-up fish bones to his compost pile. You learn that these amendments help restore minerals to the soil: calcium, phosphorus, all the invisible essentials. It's like multivitamins for the dirt. And every part of it is recycled. Old corn stalks are crushed and returned to the earth. Unused leaves feed animals. Water used to rinse produce is poured back into the canals. You wonder briefly what would happen if a modern city tried this model. And then you laugh. Someone would slap a QR code on the canoe and ruin the vibe. Still, you can't help but be impressed. The Aztecs didn't have spreadsheets. They had weather, instinct, and memory, and they still managed to grow an empire out of mud. You get up and stroll back to the edge of the chinampa, the smell of warm earth rising around you. It's no exaggeration to say this place runs on rhythm: seasonal, agricultural, human, plant, harvest, rest, repeat. There's a poetry to it. Suddenly, a pair of ducks burst out of the water and waddle indignantly across your path, flapping and muttering like two grumpy uncles late for dinner. You laugh and step aside. The ducks are part of the cycle too. They eat bugs, they fertilize, they gossip. Another canoe glides by, this one piled high with harvested greens. The chinampero gives you a sleepy nod, his hat tipped low. His boat smells like cilantro and damp rope. You wave back, feeling like maybe you belong here now. You return to your own canoe and push off again, moving slowly, reverently between plots. You're beginning to see it not just as a farming method, but a world view, a mindset that understands time differently, that accepts slowness as strength, that treats land as a partner, not a machine. The water glistens ahead, the trees sway gently, and somewhere out there, a fresh patch of earth is waiting for its first bean. The canoe rocks slightly beneath you as you drift through a long, straight canal framed by rows of chinampas on either side. By now, the scene feels familiar. Green rafts of abundance, trees planted like sentinels, water shimmering in the sun. But something about this stretch feels different. It's more structured, the rows straighter, the canals more deliberate. This is no accident. This is engineered. You're not just floating through floating gardens anymore. You're floating through a city of farms, meticulously laid out in a grid so precise it would make a Roman jealous. This part of the lake, you realize, is the product of centuries of trial, adaptation, and architectural finesse. Because the Aztecs didn't just survive in this waterlogged basin, they organized it. You pull up alongside a chinampa, whose owner seems to be in the middle of a morning routine, scooping water with a hand-carved jug, sprinkling it across rows of herbs, and muttering softly to himself. Maybe it's a prayer, maybe it's just a mental to-do list. You tie your canoe nearby and start exploring. First thing you notice, the canals are evenly spaced. They're roughly the same width, wide enough for a canoe, but not so wide that they steal too much space from the gardens. The spacing allows water to circulate and gives every plot easy access to transportation. It's like Venice, if Venice smelled like cilantro and duck feathers. Next, you realize the chinampas are all aligned in the same orientation, east to west. It's subtle, but intentional. Scholars believe this helped maximize sunlight exposure throughout the day. Plants wake with the sun, just like you do, though arguably with less grumbling. And here's the wild part. All of this was done without bulldozers, surveying drones, or coffee-fueled spreadsheets. Just humans, sticks, string, and a deep knowledge of water. You sit at the edge of one canal and dangle your feet in. The current is barely perceptible, but it's there. The water moves, not fast, but enough to circulate nutrients, prevent stagnation, and carry organic matter from one plot to another. You spot floating clumps of water hyacinth and bits of duckweed drifting gently past, like nature's version of a lazy conveyor belt. Off in the distance, you can see one of the aqueducts that feeds this system stonework winding down from the hills like a ribbon. These aqueducts, built long before the Spanish arrived, brought fresh water from mountain springs into the lakes and canals. It's a balancing act, not too much, not too little, just enough flow to keep things alive. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs adapted these grid systems from earlier cultures or developed them independently in response to the lake's fickle moods. What's clear is that the result is a masterpiece of water management. You paddle again, this time through a narrower channel. You begin to notice how elevation plays a role. Some chinampas sit slightly higher, their edges reinforced with stone or bundled reeds. Others dip low, half sunken like they're shrugging under the weight of a heavy harvest. Farmers adjust them, constantly adding material, reshaping borders, shoring up weak corners. Maintenance is never finished, like combing long hair or rearranging your bookshelf every 3 months just to feel something. Then you see the gates. At the entrance to one major canal, there's a handmade water gate, nothing more than a hinged plank with woven reed panels. But it functions as a regulator, controlling the flow between one section and another. During heavy rains, farmers can close the gate to prevent flooding. During dry spells, they can open it to let the canals breathe. It's hydrology with sticks and intuition. You stop at a chinampa where a small group is repairing a breach. One edge has eroded, and muddy water seeps in. They're using mats of reeds, packed mud, and willow roots to rebuild the wall. It's a bit like fixing a leaky roof made of mashed potatoes. Messy, slippery, surprisingly effective. They invite you to help, and you jump in, literally. The water's cool around your knees, the mud sticky and eager to cling. You press your hands into it, smoothing it like frosting onto a very annoyed cake. It's not glamorous, but by the time you're done, the wall holds. You sit back, exhausted but proud, as the sun glints off the water and a pair of dragonflies buzz by like approval on wings. One of the older farmers points toward the sky, where storm clouds are gathering behind the mountains. The afternoon rains will come, as they always do, and the canals will rise. But this system, these floating farms, are ready. They've been managing water long before spreadsheets, long before Spain, long before most people figured out what to do with a swamp. You remember that this whole thing was once viewed as temporary, makeshift, a workaround. And yet here it is, centuries later, still floating, still feeding, still holding its shape against time. You rest your head against the side of the canoe and watch a beetle crawl slowly across a squash leaf. It's not in a hurry, neither are you. Everything here feels designed not just for function, but for endurance. It's not flashy, it's not fast, but it works, and it lasts. The wind stirs, the willows nod, and the canals keep breathing. The wind picks up as your canoe glides past a particularly tall patch of maize, the golden tassels whispering secrets to each other as they sway. You lean back, watching the stalks shimmer in the late afternoon light. This is maize country now. Corn, sweet corn, everywhere. It's not an exaggeration to say that maize is the star of this floating Eden. You see it sprouting from nearly every chinampa, standing proud and tall, the backbone of Aztec agriculture, mythology, and, let's be honest, meal planning. The Aztecs didn't just like maize, they lived maize. You stop at a chinampa that looks almost like a corn temple. The stalks are as tall as men, their leaves stretching skyward like green spears. A farmer motions for you to join him. He hands you an itzotl, a curved wooden harvesting tool, and shows you how to snap the ears clean from the stalk. The motion is surprisingly satisfying. Crack, twist, drop. You fall into rhythm, the basket filling with kernels of golden promise. Your guide wipes sweat from his brow and, grinning, breaks open a fresh ear of sweet corn. He offers it to you raw. You hesitate, then take a bite. It's crunchy, starchy, a little grassy, but warm from the sun and weirdly comforting. Not bad for something plucked straight from a floating platform. You sit for a moment under the shade of the ahuejotes, watching the late-day sun turn the canals to silver. It's peaceful, but you know the corn's role here is anything but decorative. This plant fed empires. Corn was the staple eaten daily in various forms: tamales, tortillas, atole, a warm corn-based drink, and tlaxcali, the ancestor of modern flatbreads. With chinampas producing multiple harvests per year, maize production reached levels that could sustain hundreds of thousands of people. In a swamp, that's not just impressive, that's basically agricultural witchcraft. You wander down a neatly planted row and notice how carefully spaced everything is. Not just for aesthetics, this layout ensures airflow, sunlight, and efficient root systems. The Aztecs weren't just throwing seeds around, they were technicians, soil scientists in feathered cloaks. Historians still argue whether this level of agricultural sophistication emerged purely from practical necessity or whether there was a spiritual dimension guiding the hand. After all, maize wasn't just food, it was divine. Many Aztec gods were associated with it, including Tenochtitlan, the maize deity, who was honored with offerings during key planting and harvest times. You reach a small shrine tucked at the edge of one chinampa. It's not large, just a clay figure under a woven roof, surrounded by offerings, a few coins, dried flowers, a half-eaten tamale. A farmer kneels there silently, hands in the dirt, murmuring something too quiet to catch. Maybe it's thanks, maybe it's a request. Either way, you feel the sacredness in the soil. Corn, beans, squash, the three sisters, they grow together here like a family. But maize always leads. You trace your fingers along the stalks, feel the coarse texture, hear the soft rustle as the wind plays through them. It's like listening to a memory. Further along the canal, a young boy is helping his grandmother grind dried kernels into masa, using a metate, a stone-grinding slab. The repetitive scraping sound blends with birdsong and the soft babble of water. You crouch nearby, watching as the bright yellow flour builds up in a shallow bowl. It smells faintly sweet, earthy. You're invited to taste the finished product. A flat, hand-shaped tortilla is cooked over a small clay griddle. No toppings, just corn. You bite in, and it's warm, soft, dense, a flavor so basic it's transcendent, the taste of centuries. As the sun begins to lower, casting long shadows across the lake, you help stack the harvested ears in baskets. The canoe sinks slightly as the weight increases. The maize will be taken to market at dawn, part of the never-ending loop plant. Harvest, share, repeat. You think back to something the farmer said earlier, how every kernel holds a little of the old world in it. Not metaphor, literal biology. These are the descendants of plants bred and selected over thousands of years. Each one is history you can chew. You paddle onward, slower now, the weight of the day settling into your arms and shoulders. The wind carries the scent of roasting corn from somewhere unseen. The air feels heavier, the light softer. You pass a chinampa where someone's experimenting rows of purple corn, a few golden squash blossoms, maybe even quinoa. Innovation within tradition. The gardens continue to evolve, even now. And yet, maize endures. Because in the end, this is what fed the poets, the warriors, the emperors, the people. A single seed, buried in lake muck and duck droppings, becoming food, prayer, identity. You look down at a corn kernel in your palm, tiny, glossy, unimpressive, and absolutely everything. Evening starts to settle over the lake. bringing cooler air and softer colors. The sky turns a dusty orange, and shadows stretch across the chinampas like sleepy arms reaching out for the night. You're still drifting, but the pace has slowed. Everything has. Even the frogs sound a bit more relaxed now, like they're considering calling it a day. You're drawn to a chinampa that seems different from the others. No corn, no squash, just space. A small fire smolders near the center, surrounded by carefully placed stones. Incense curls upward, and bundles of herbs are laid out in deliberate arrangements. This isn't a farm plot, it's a ritual site. Because even among floating vegetables and poop barges, the Aztecs made room for the sacred. You step onto the chinampa carefully, the mud springy underfoot, and feel the energy shift. It's quieter here, even though the trees still rustle and water still laps. A man in embroidered cotton is kneeling by the fire. He doesn't look up right away. He's focused, placing small offerings into the flames, a pinch of maize flour, a sprig of marigold, a few cocoa beans. It's not a grand ceremony. It's not for show. It's just what you do. You sit near the edge, giving him space, and feel the warmth of the fire against your skin. A soft wind carries the scent of burning copal and something else, maybe sage. Whatever it is, it smells like memory. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you could be anywhere in time. The Aztecs believed in cycles of life, death, seasons, days. Everything returned. Everything was part of something larger. So, of course, there were rituals between the rows. You don't just plant and hope. You ask, you thank, you honor. Historians still debate how widespread this kind of ritual practice was on individual chinampas. Was it mostly done at temples, or did families perform their own ceremonies in the field? Evidence leans toward both, because when your food depends on water, sun, and unpredictable forces, you don't leave anything to chance. And also, why wouldn't you bring the gods to your garden? You remember earlier seeing a tiny shrine tucked under a willow tree, half covered in moss, and clearly weathered by decades of rain. Now, in this space, you see its purpose more clearly. These aren't separate worlds, the sacred and the practical. They are interwoven like the reed walls that form the garden beds themselves. The man finishes his offerings and looks up at you with tired but kind eyes. He gestures to the earth beside him. You take a seat, and he hands you a handful of seeds. You don't recognize them, small, speckled, maybe beans, maybe something stranger. He shows you how to press one gently into the soil, then cover it with a layer of ash from the fire. Fertilizer and blessing in one. You plant your seed, feeling oddly nervous, as if the earth might judge you. Then he says something in a low voice. You catch just one word, Plazosamati, thank you. You nod, because really, what else is there to say? As the light continues to fade, he begins to sing. It's a slow, low chant in Nahuatl, the syllables smooth and liquid, like water being poured. The sound blends into the background of lake noise, crickets chirping, trees creaking, ducks mumbling to each other in sleepy protest. You lie back on the chinampa, your head resting on a bundle of dried reeds, and stare up at the darkening sky. Stars begin to blink through the haze, reflected perfectly in the canal water, like they're growing upside down. You wonder how many farmers made offerings here before you, how many sang to their crops, whispered to their gods, or made promises under these same stars. Probably thousands, maybe more, and the chinampa remembers all of them in some quiet, loamy way. A woman paddles by slowly, her canoe filled not with produce, but with flower garlands and clay jars. She nods at the man near the fire and places a bundle of something, maybe cacao, maybe sage at the edge of the plot. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. You start to see the layers now. Not just the mud and muck, the spiritual layers, the emotional ones, These gardens are offerings too, living altars that feed both stomach and soul. And each plant, each tree, each bundle of basil, part of a cycle that connects the earth, the sky, and the lake in between. You rise quietly and return to your canoe. The fire behind you still glows, now smaller, like a heart beating slowly beneath the soil. You drift off again, your paddle barely touching the water. The stars multiply above. Somewhere in the distance, someone plays a flute. And somewhere even farther, a god of maize watches a single bean sprout and smiles. You wake up, or at least you think you do. It's that dreamy, weightless phase where sleep brushes up against waking like reeds brushing the side of a boat. The air is cooler now, touched with dew. The sky overhead is navy blue, streaked with clouds the color of worn cotton. You're back on the chinampa, not the ritual one, but another. This one hums with quiet life. It's early, pre-dawn, somewhere in the darkness. A duck sneezes. You suppress a giggle. Someone's already awake. A woman walks carefully along the edge of the chinampa with a woven basket over her arm, barefoot, deliberate. You watch as she stops at each plot, checking the leaves, touching the soil, whispering things, not prayers, this time gossip. Because chinampa life isn't just about gods and gardening, it's also about people. And people talk. You drift along a canal and begin to notice the soft web of social life that floats just as neatly as the gardens do. Neighbors call to each other across the water, voices low and musical. A man holds up a squash the size of a small dog and shouts something proudly. His neighbor replies with mock awe and exaggerated applause. Two women pass each other in canoes, one balancing a bundle of onions, the other her infant son. They chat, exchange herbs, and paddle on like it's the most casual thing in the world. Which, here, it is. This place, this soggy, squelchy, magnificent network isn't just an agricultural machine, it's a social one. Each chinampa is connected not only by canal, but by family. Generations work the same patch of earth, learn the same seasonal patterns, tell the same jokes about the neighbor's lopsided chayote. There's a rhythm to it all, one that includes planting, harvesting, and some truly elaborate passive-aggressive interactions. You pass a pair of teenage boys paddling slowly. One's clearly trying to impress the other by paddling, standing up. It's not going well. A splash, a yelp, a canoe wobbling like a plate of jelly. You wave, and they wave back, drenched and laughing. Even farming disputes have their own flavor here. One man grumbles loudly about another's corn leaning into his canal space. The accused responds by singing a sarcastic ballad about overly sensitive gardeners. Neither stops working. Historians still debate how formal these relationships were, whether the chinampa zones were tightly controlled by noble classes or managed by more communal systems of accountability. But even in the scholarly gray zone, one thing's clear: these farmers relied on each other. Tools were shared, seeds were traded, secrets were definitely gossiped. And not just gossip stories. You pull up to a small communal fire pit at the center of a few chinampas, where elders sit, telling tales over a breakfast of atole and roasted squash. One woman, face-lined like river channels, is recounting a story of a chinampa that floated away in the middle of the night and ended up in the far west canal like a rogue vegetable pirate. The others shake their heads and laugh like they've heard it 100 times and still find it funny. Someone hands you a cup of warm atole, thick, lightly sweet, made from ground maize and cinnamon. You sip slowly. It tastes like breakfast and storytelling. You sit among them for a while, listening to Nahuatl phrases weave through the smoky morning air. Even without understanding every word, you get the gist: something about a stubborn gourd, a lazy nephew, and a duck who definitely has a grudge. Eventually, you drift back into your canoe and keep moving. Along the way, You pass more signs of chinampa life tools stuck upright in the soil like little flags, sandals left by a canal edge, a sleeping dog curled on a mat of reeds. Every detail speaks of people living with the land, not just on it. And there's something cozy about it, something neighborly, the kind of intimacy that comes from seeing each other at dawn, muddy and yawning, not quite ready to discuss the gods, but always ready to trade a good tomato. You stop to rest beside a young woman harvesting herbs of Pazote, Hoja Santa, maybe some wild mint. She tells you, quietly, that the man 2 plots over always picks his chilies too early. He thinks they'll get spicier if he yells at them. She says, you snort. She grins and hands you a sprig of something sharp and peppery. For your canoe, she says, keeps mosquitoes away, or at least confuses them. You tuck it behind your ear like a badge of honor and continue paddling. Somewhere behind you, a baby cries. Somewhere ahead, a man sings to his corn in a voice that's barely louder than a sigh. All around, life floats forward not in a rush, not in chaos, but in gentle, gossipy, glorious rhythm. You look out across the chinampas, and for the first time, they don't feel like islands, they feel like neighborhoods. The morning sun rises just a little higher, and the canals begin to shimmer like polished glass. The world is fully awake now. You pass chinampas alive with activity farmers bending over rows of chard, children hauling baskets half their size, dogs barking at ducks who refuse to be intimidated. You feel it in the air, purpose. Because what these farmers are doing isn't just about personal survival or neighborly pride, it's bigger than that. You're feeding an empire. The chinampas weren't backyard gardens. They were the literal foundation of Aztec civilization, providing the bulk of fresh produce for Tenochtitlán, a city of at least 200,000 people at its peak, possibly more. That's larger than most European capitals at the time. And while cities elsewhere relied on long trade routes or distant estates, Tenochtitlán had something better: food delivered by canoe. Daily, fresh, local. Organic, even, though the farmers wouldn't have used the term unless someone offered them a grant. You float past a bustling scene, canoes being loaded with baskets of produce, squash blossoms, beans, maize, herbs, peppers of every possible heat level. The farmers are fast but methodical. They tie bundles with strips of agave fiber, pack them just so, and cover them with woven mats to keep the sun off. You catch a few snippets of conversation. One man jokes about getting the best tomatoes to the priests first, or they'll start asking the gods for rain, just to ruin your harvest. Another woman sighs about needing more time to grow flowers for a wedding. And someone, somewhere, is singing the same short phrase over and over. The corn is awake. The corn is awake. You get the sense that everyone knows their role. These chinampas aren't just about food, they're about logistics, trade, tribute, cultural glue. Historians still debate the full extent of chinampa-based food supply within the imperial system. Some argue it supported the entire core of the empire. Others suggest it was one crucial part of a broader food network that included hillside farms, tribute grain from provinces, and seasonal markets. But no one disputes this: without chinampas, Tenochtitlán wouldn't have grown the way it did. You paddle alongside a man whose canoe is stacked to the ceiling with marigolds. He tells you, half smiling, that his family's chinampa grows only ceremonial flowers now. We used to grow beans. Now we grow color. You glance at the glowing orange blooms and nod. They do look like sunrise made solid. Up ahead, the canal widens into a waterway that leads toward the center of the city. The skyline of Tenochtitlán begins to appear in the distance, stone temples rising like teeth from the lake, whitewashed walls gleaming under the sun, flags fluttering. From here, it doesn't look like a city of conquest. It looks like something born gently out of the lake. And it was, in a way. This whole empire was rooted not just in war or religion, but in food, in mud, in trees, in the quiet genius of turning a swamp into a salad. Your guide pulls up beside you in his canoe. "You hungry?" he asks. You nod, and he tosses you a bundle wrapped in leaves. Inside, 2 tamales, still warm, one stuffed with squash blossoms, the other with black beans and epizot. You eat slowly, floating toward the city, watching other farmers do the same. It's not a feast, it's fuel. Efficient, flavorful, deeply satisfying fuel made possible by the ground beneath your feet, which is also, somehow, water. You drift alongside another transport canoe, this one manned by 2 teenage girls. One rows, the other balances a massive clay jug between her knees. They wave at you and giggle when you nearly lose your tamale to a gust of wind. "That's chinampa tax," one calls out. "The lake always takes a bite." You wave back and watch as they vanish into one of the narrower canals, probably heading toward a neighborhood market. Because this produce doesn't just go to temples or palaces, it goes to everyone. Market stalls bloom like flowers throughout the city, piles of fresh greens, chilies, fruits, roots, and they all start here, in this floating patchwork of sweat and soil. You begin to understand the full elegance of it. The chinampas weren't just farms, they were the logistical backbone of a civilization that thrived in one of the most complex environments imaginable. And they worked beautifully. Someone once said that empires are built on grain. And sure, Rome had its wheat, Egypt had the Nile's barley, but the Aztecs had chinampas, floating fields that didn't just support cities, they defined them. And now, as your canoe glides forward under the shade of a willow, you feel it too, that quiet, rooted power. This isn't just a story about farming. It's a story about building something that lasts. The city fades behind you as you turn back into the maze of chinampas. The sun is past its peak now, and the light has grown softer, warmer, as if the world is beginning to exhale. A light breeze trails over the canals, rippling the surface and sending a flock of waterbirds fluttering into the sky like a living fanfare. You ease your canoe into a quiet canal lined with chinampas that look different. There's no activity here, no harvesting, no shouting farmers or floating markets, just stillness. And then you notice it? Some of these chinampas aren't growing anything at all. Their trees are overgrown, their fences slumped or missing. Water laps softly over their edges, and the soil is riddled with wild weeds. Others have half collapsed into the lake, their structure caving, their anchors rotted. It's like floating through the ruins of a forgotten village. And yet it's beautiful. This was once a thriving section of the Chinampa network. But something happened here. A shift, a turning point. And like all civilizations, no matter how advanced, this one had its fall. You drift quietly, the silence punctuated only by the faint buzz of insects and the creak of tree limbs. These chinampas weren't destroyed by fire or war, not here, anyway. They were abandoned, slowly, gradually, as something new came. Spanish boots on water? The year is 1519. The empire is at its height. Tenochtitlán gleams. Chinampas feed hundreds of thousands. And then, one day, strangers arrive on the coast. Men in metal, bearded, horse-mounted, and confusingly loud. They come with weapons that spit fire, diseases that seep through villages like mist, and intentions that are, let's say, not agriculturally focused. You imagine the first chinamperos who spotted them from afar. Maybe while gathering water hyacinths, maybe while hauling a basket of marigolds. You wonder what they thought if they knew, deep down, that something irreversible had floated into view. The conquest of the Aztec Empire wasn't fast. It was complex, full of alliances, betrayals, and siege tactics. But one thing is certain when Hernán Cortés and his men arrived in Tenochtitlan. They were completely unprepared for what they found. A city on water, floating farms, canoe highways. It was like a hallucination. Spanish chroniclers wrote about the city as if it were a vision: clean, orderly, abundant, bizarre. They were amazed, and then, predictably, they ruined it. You drift past a broken willow, its roots half submerged, its branches drooping into the water like mourning arms. This tree might have been alive back then. It might have watched the invasion unfold from the banks, powerless but present. When the siege of Tenochtitlan began in 1521, the chinampas became part of the battleground. Some were trampled, others set ablaze. Though it's famously hard to burn a floating garden, they tried anyway. Canoes were overturned, crops destroyed, families scattered. Still, the chinampas held on. Historians still argue how much of the original Chinampa network survived the conquest. Some say vast portions were drained or allowed to rot. Others believe many plots continued to function, adapted to new regimes, slowly folding into the fabric of colonial life. You pass a chinampa with a stone cross planted at its corner. It's old, moss-covered, cracked, likely added sometime in the early colonial period when Christian symbols began replacing older icons. It feels out of place, yet entirely at home in this layered landscape. Because even as the Aztec Empire collapsed, the land kept whispering the old patterns. You imagine a farmer may be one of the last to work these plots in those chaotic years, still planting beans, still pulling weeds, still paddling past Spanish patrols with a basket of squash. Maybe they didn't stop because they didn't know how, or maybe they just couldn't let it go. You drift a while longer in silence, letting the weight of history settle over you like evening mist. A heron lands nearby, graceful and stern. It regards you for a moment, then begins picking its way along a crumbling chinampa edge, as if it too is checking the structural integrity. The canals narrow, the plants grow wilder, but even here, even in what looks like abandonment, you see life, a cluster of wild tomatoes, a maize stalk growing sideways from a crack in the soil. Nature doesn't quit, it just changes costumes. You sit in your canoe and realize something: these aren't failures. These are the quiet survivors, the faded pages of a floating book. And the story isn't over. You continue paddling through the quiet, half-sunken gardens, where the air feels thicker, somehow weighted with memory. The chinampas around you are more like ghosts now, uneven, overgrown, trailing vines like loose threads from an old tapestry. The water is still reflective. You barely hear the paddle dip in and out, as though even sound respects this place. And yet, the silence isn't empty. It's haunted. Not by horror stories or dramatic hauntings, but by something subtler, lingering presence, the kind that seeps into soil and stays put. Locals say that the lake bed beneath the chinampas holds more than just roots and reeds. It holds bones. You glide past a plot where no one farms anymore, but someone has placed a small wreath of marigolds on the bank. It floats gently in the canal like a tiny, flickering raft. And that's when you feel it. This land isn't just for the living. The Aztecs believed the world was layered realms stacked atop each other, each with its own spirits, duties, and destinations. The earth wasn't neutral ground, it was alive, and it remembered. Many of these chinampas, especially the older ones, were built over buried ritual sites or former altars. In fact, some archaeologists believe there are whole temples sunk beneath what is now farmland, places where offerings were once made, where sacrifices occurred, where people gathered under the same sun you're feeling on your skin right now. Historians still debate how many layers of culture lie beneath the surviving chinampas. The region saw centuries of development before the Mexica arrived. Xochimilco, Tlatelolco, Calco, all city-states with their own histories, their own sacred places. As the lake receded or rose with the seasons, some of those places were swallowed. Others were paved over with mud and maize. You pause beside a particularly old-looking willow tree its trunk split and hollowed. In its crook, someone has tucked a few flower petals and a small carved figure weathered nearly to smoothness. A face, perhaps, a deity, or just someone remembered. The chinampero who passes you next doesn't stop. He glances at the offering, bows his head slightly, and keeps paddling. No words, no explanation, just acknowledgement. Because even now, even 500 years later, the people here know. You ask a farmer quietly, respectfully, whether anyone has ever dug too deep and found something they weren't expecting. He laughs softly, but there's no humor in it. Always, he says, bones, bowls, little gods. Sometimes you stop digging. Sometimes you just say thank you and keep planting. You pass another chinampa and spot something half buried in the soil, a shard of pottery. Maybe. You lean closer. It's painted, faint lines forming what might have once been a spiral or a feather. You don't touch it. You just look, and it looks back. The water here feels thicker, not just physically, emotionally. You imagine the weight of centuries pressing down through each garden bed, each layer of muck holding memories like old letters pressed into books. Some plots are said to be cursed not in a dramatic, horror movie way, but in the sense that things just don't grow right. Too wet, too dry. Always blighted. Locals speak of these places in hushed tones, their names rarely written down. They're the gardens that remember too much, the ones that can't quite forget. You round a bend and find a narrow chinampa that's been left wild on purpose. The trees are thick, and vines hang like curtains across its entrance. It's a sacred plot. Someone tells you later. One never touched, kept as a reminder. Or maybe a barrier. And in a world built on layers of earth, of water, of culture, it makes sense that there'd be places you don't poke too deeply, just in case the past is still napping. You rest for a moment beneath a thick canopy. The shadows here are deep, and the air is cooler. A bird calls out somewhere in the reeds, a low warble that echoes strangely. It feels like a song passed down by beak and feather for 1,000 years. Even nature remembers. As the sun dips lower, you paddle again quietly, now watching the patterns of water twist around the edges of the chinampas like long-forgotten handwriting. You've moved beyond agriculture, beyond engineering. Now you're floating through memory itself. The lake is old, the soil is older, and the stories they hold aren't all written down. You pass one last tree thick, knotted, covered in moss, and at its base, a small ceramic bowl rests in a patch of sunlight. Inside 4 maize kernels, perfectly placed, unmoved by wind or time. You don't touch it, you just paddle past. Because here, among the ghosts of the lake bed, not everything is meant for hands. The shadows grow longer now, stretching across the water like fingers trying to hold on to the last of the day. You steer your canoe gently back toward the more active zones of the chinampa system where life pulses a little faster and the plants stand a little taller. But something's shifted. The calm has deepened. Even the birds are quieter, like they're waiting for something. Then you hear it, the scrape of wood on stone, the clatter of armor, a language that doesn't belong here. Spanish? You round a bend in the canal, and your vision narrows. Ahead, unfamiliar figures are stomping awkwardly through the shallows, boots thick with mud, faces taut with confusion and mild disgust, muskets slung across backs, helmets reflecting the sun, swords glinting with the kind of confidence only newcomers carry. The conquistadors have arrived. It's a strange sight. They look so out of place here, like chess pieces dropped into a koi pond. This world wasn't built for them. Their horses flounder in the mud. Their armor creaks with each awkward step. They glance around, unsure whether this watery maze is a threat or a joke. And you're watching from the shadows of a willow, heart quiet, but pounding. The Spanish had never seen anything like this. No maps had prepared them for a floating city, Tenochtitlán, in all its symmetry and grandeur, rising from the lake like a dream. And these chinampas, these neat little rectangles of green, didn't fit into their ideas of how farming was supposed to work. They called them floating gardens, but misunderstood their genius entirely. To them, it looked quaint, picturesque, something to marvel at, sketch in a notebook, and then probably pave over later. You watch as one Spaniard kneels at the edge of a chinampa, digs into the soil, and frowns. He mutters something in Castilian about the mud, about the weird smell. He doesn't know he's holding the beating heart of an empire in his palm. Not gold, not jewels, dirt. But the conquistadors weren't interested in dirt. They were here for temples, treasure, and power, food that came second at best. So, they trampled through the chinampas, redirected canals, and restructured what they couldn't understand. The fragile balance that had taken centuries to build. They dismantled it in years. You paddle past a chinampa being hastily harvested by a family. Children scoop up squash blossoms with frantic hands. Mothers pile chilies into baskets. Fathers pull maize stalks before they're ready. They know what's coming. Rumors have already reached them. Markets closing. Land seized. Soldiers posted at canal checkpoints. Historians still argue about how quickly the Spanish colonial system replaced indigenous agricultural structures. Some records suggest parts of the chinampa system remained functional for decades, even centuries after the conquest. Others describe rapid disrepair and forced labor restructuring. What's clear is that this invasion wasn't just about conquering cities, it was about controlling the very way food moved through the land. Taxes were imposed. Tribute was redirected. Land once passed down through generations was now mapped and claimed by men who couldn't pronounce the names of the crops they were expropriating. And yet, you paddle farther and see a small, defiant detail. A chinampa still thriving, a farmer still working, an elder singing a planting song in Nahuatl, loud enough that the birds paused to listen. Life didn't vanish overnight. It bent. It disguised itself. It persisted. Some chinamperos adapted. They learned the new language just enough to get by. They paid the taxes and kept their heads low, but they never stopped planting. You pass a group of children laughing as they throw mud balls at a wooden post, an old game. Probably hundreds of years old by then. Their parents may have feared the soldiers, but the children still saw the lake as home. There's strength in that. At the far edge of the canal, a missionary has set up a small altar, a cross, a bell, a few books. He preaches to a handful of gathered villagers, his words full of certainty. You can't hear it all, but you catch a few phrases. Salvation, new world, God's plan. You glance back at the fields of maize swaying gently under the afternoon breeze and wonder what they think about that. Because the chinampas didn't need salvation, they needed water, sunlight, and to be left alone. You feel the weight of it all as your canoe glides silently through the water. The absurdity of a conquest that mistook engineered gardens for novelties. That ignored the brilliance of a system simply because it didn't fit their map. And yet the lake didn't forget. Even now, centuries later, the blueprint remains, beneath the surface, in the roots, in the corners of the lake that refused to dry up, in the quiet resistance of people who never stopped planting. A breeze passes through the willows, a bird circles overhead, and the Spaniards, they vanish, not from history books, but from this moment, because you're still here. The chinampa is still here. And the garden continues. The sun is beginning its descent now, casting a long amber reflection across the canals. Shadows cling to the chinampas like soft blankets, and the air is heavy with the scent of wet earth, crushed leaves, and distant cooking fires. You drift past a stand of old ahuejotes and see a trail of smoke curling upward between them. Someone's boiling tamales. Probably, The smell makes your stomach growl, but you're not heading toward food. You're heading toward the end. Not the end of your journey, exactly, but the part of history where the world changes so slowly, so invisibly, you don't notice until everything around you feels different. You arrive at a section of lake that doesn't really feel like a lake anymore. It's narrower, shallower, more canal than open water. There are buildings here, roads, concrete embankments, electrical poles rising out of what was once the sacred water of Texcoco. You're not floating in ancient Tenochtitlán now. You're floating through what's left of it. This is what happened over centuries. The lake was drained, piece by piece, plot by plot. Colonial governments redirected rivers, dug drainage ditches, and built over wetlands. What was once a vast interconnected water system became landlocked and parched. For progress? For expansion? For control? And the chinampas? Many were buried, paved, abandoned, turned into real estate, parking lots, highways. Some sank into silence under layers of cement and bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether the massive effort to drain the lake was ever truly necessary. Mexico City now struggles with the very problems the Aztecs solved: floods in the rainy season, droughts in the dry, sinking foundations, vanishing aquifers. A modern city built atop a lake trying very hard to remind everyone that it's still a lake. You paddle past remnants of this slow erasure, a wall of cinder blocks cutting through an old canal, a rusted gate where water once flowed freely, a half-flooded shack where someone still tries to grow herbs in plastic crates lined with newspaper. A man waves at you from his porch. He's sitting beside a wheelbarrow full of lettuce, a radio buzzing softly beside him. The music is upbeat, but his smile is weary. You drift a bit farther and stop your canoe beside a concrete bridge. Traffic rumbles above you. A dog barks from behind a metal fence, somewhere beyond the overpass. A plane arcs through the smog-streaked sky. And yet, right there, tucked beside the bridge support, you spot it. A tiny chinampa. No wider than a hallway rug, bordered with bricks and old tires. Maize stalks, 3 rows deep. Beans curling up a bent metal trellis. A baby fig tree in a paint bucket. It's not pretty, it's not ancient, it's not sacred. But it's trying. You crouch at the edge and touch the soil. It's warm, still soft, still alive. Because here's the thing, the chinampa system didn't disappear all at once. It faded, fought, adapted, and in some places, it refused to die. You float past a family harvesting radishes from a restored plot. The daughter is maybe 8, covered in mud, and giggling as she tosses a root vegetable at her brother, who's holding a phone in one hand and a bunch of cilantro in the other. They're surrounded by plastic tarps, stacked crates, a scarecrow made from an old soccer jersey. This is Chinampa 2.0. Community-led, semi-urban, powered by memory and necessity. Farmers here still grow food, still battle invasive species, still patch reed fences with old netting and keep the canals alive with backyard pumps and rainwater catchment. You spot an older woman wearing a straw hat and sweeping a footpath lined with aloe plants. She points you toward the old route back to Xochimilco, where some of the last intact chinampas still survive. Lo que queda, she says. What remains? You pause at the edge of her chinampa and look back at the highway behind you, at the rising sprawl, the towers, the city trying to forget it was once a lake. Then you look at the chinampa again, the beans, the squash, the hands that still know how to listen to soil. And you realize the gardens didn't lose, they just went quiet. Like seeds. Waiting. You step into your canoe, hands dirt-streaked and spirit heavy, but not sad. The water under you still holds something ancient, something green and stubborn and deeply rooted. And the story, though changed, is far from over. You push your canoe gently away from the city's edge and begin paddling south, toward one of the last living lungs of the ancient lake Xochimilco. The water grows clearer here. The noise of traffic fades, and the scent in the air shifts still earthy, but tinged now with wildflowers and something sweeter. Maybe hope. Ahead, the chinampas return not as memories, not as ruins, but as survivors. Bright, blooming, carefully tended. You blink, because at first glance, it almost feels like time rewinding. But look closer, and you'll see it. This is not the past. This is the present, trying very hard to remember how to be a garden. You hear music first. Laughter, guitar, the high-pitched cheer of teenagers pretending to be quieter than they are. A flotilla of color bursts into view, long, flat boats called trajineras, painted in reds, yellows, blues so bright they might be trying to outshine the sun itself. Names arch above the boats in curly script: Lupita, Maria Bonita, Reina de la Noche. Each boat carries a little world, a birthday party with confetti and soda bottles, a couple slow dancing under paper garlands, a grandmother napping beside a stack of tamales, and all of it floats past the chinampas like a traveling theater. This is modern-day Xochimilco, where the last functional chinampas still breathe. You drift past them now, real, working farms, maize, chard, lettuce, amaranth. The rows are tidy, the water lines clean, and the ahuejotes still tower at the corners like they never left. But there's something else here too, tourists. Boats glide by carrying people with sunglasses and cell phones, snapping selfies beside sunflowers and asking questions in fractured Spanish. You watch as a tour guide gestures proudly toward a chinampa and explains loudly, confidently, and mostly correctly how it floats. A man offers a bouquet of flowers to his date while a mariachi band starts tuning up in the background. And it's weird. It's beautiful. It's a little surreal. Because this, somehow, is what remains of the Empire's salad bowl, a hybrid space where the sacred and the silly now grow side by side. You pass a restored chinampa where a group of university students are kneeling in the dirt, notebooks open. They're part of a conservation program, studying ancient farming methods. One of them turns over a clump of soil and grins. She's just found an earthworm. You hear her say, "This means the soil is alive." She gets it. Historians still debate how much of this is genuine preservation and how much is cultural tourism. But here, with mud on your hands and sunlight on your back, it doesn't feel like a performance. It feels like persistence, like a system refusing to vanish. You pause at a chinampa run by a quiet, elderly farmer. His clothes are worn, but his hands move with precision. He plants a row of spinach with the care of a man slicing an offering cake. You watch in silence as he works methodical, unhurried. The lake knows him. The soil remembers him. He offers you a gourd full of cool water. You sip. It tastes faintly of mint. He doesn't say much, but when he speaks, it's with a quiet authority. If you feed the earth, it feeds you back. Then he smiles, shrugs, and returns to weeding. You continue drifting, passing more chinampas, some pristine, some cluttered, all alive. A teenage boy plays a flute under a willow tree while his dog splashes joyfully through a shallow canal. A woman with a plastic sun visor balances a crate of produce on her head and sings softly in Nahuatl. And then, suddenly, you find yourself in a clearing, an open patch of canal, with no boats, no music, no party hats, just quiet. The air cools, the water stills. You close your eyes and float for a while, letting it sink in. The chinampas aren't a museum. They're not frozen. They change, adapt, survive. They're not here because someone preserved them behind glass. They're here because someone kept planting, every day, through droughts and floods, through colonization and urbanization, through apathy and asphalt. Because even after all that, the gardens wouldn't die. They just waited, patient, rooted, ready. You drift past one last chinampa, where a boy waves at you while feeding a duck from his palm. Behind him, rows of vegetables gleam in the fading sun. It doesn't feel like an echo anymore. It feels like a heartbeat. You paddle farther into the fading light, following the soft music that drifts across the water like a dream you're not quite ready to wake from. The chinampas here are still vibrant, still productive, but they've become something else too, something new, layered with contradictions. This isn't just farmland anymore, it's a stage. You pass a group of young women in matching dresses, each crowned with flowers, perched on the edge of a chinampa, like living bouquets. A photographer crouches nearby, directing them with exaggerated hand gestures. A quinceañera shoot. The girls giggle between poses, adjusting their skirts, checking their phones, glancing nervously at the water as if it might eat their sandals. You drift by quietly. Their laughter bounces off the trees. A little farther on, you spot a wedding just wrapping up. A small group of guests are gathered on a wooden dock draped with marigolds and tissue paper flags. The newlyweds stand arm in arm, smiling beneath an arch of sunflowers. A canoe waits to carry them away, covered in petals. Someone pops open a bottle of sparkling something, and for a moment, it feels like a fairy tale. But the duck waddling through the crowd keeps it grounded. Because in Xochimilco today, the chinampas carry layers old and new, sacred and selfie-worthy. You glide through a world where ancient engineering quietly supports birthday parties, family reunions, Instagram reels, and Sunday picnics. It's a little chaotic, a little commercial, and also kind of beautiful. You pass a vendor boat selling elotes grilled corn slathered in mayonnaise, cheese, lime, and chili. A man waves you over and offers you one for 20 pesos. You take it. Of course you do. It's messy and delicious, and so rich with flavor, it nearly makes you sit down right there in the canoe. The corn, you realize, probably came from a chinampa not far from here. So did the limes, maybe even the chili. The ecosystem still works. It's just working alongside phone screens and Bluetooth speakers now. You paddle toward a more peaceful patch, where a woman is harvesting amaranth beside her daughter. The girl is maybe 5. She's got a toy duck in one hand and a bunch of spinach in the other. She holds both like they matter equally. You smile at her, and she smiles back, teeth missing and eyes wide. A generation raised among the rows. Historians still debate how sustainable this hybrid space is, part preservation, part tourist engine, part working farm. There are threats. After all, urban encroachment, water pollution, invasive species, noise, plastic waste, the things that creep in, quietly and constantly. But for now, the gardens hold. You pass a chinampa where volunteers are clearing trash from a Canal College students, probably. They wear gloves and bright orange vests and shout things like, "Cuidado!" And that's not a fish, that's a flip-flop. One of them laughs when they fall in, splashing a heron that takes off in a flurry of feathers and disapproval. It's chaotic, yes, but also healing. People care, not just scientists and farmers, families, teenagers, tourists, city kids who've never seen a tomato on the vine until today. You drift under a bridge now, covered in vines and painted graffiti. Someone scrawled La Tierra Vive in red across the wall. The land lives. And it does. Even under the weight of cameras and celebrations, it breathes. Even when paddles are swapped for selfie sticks, the soil grows. Even when the ancient gods are no longer worshipped with chants and copal, the plants still follow the sun. The ducks still eat the bugs. The willows still lean into the wind. You float past a final chinampa glowing with string lights. It's clearly prepped for another event tonight, maybe a concert or a dinner. But right now, it's empty. The lights twinkle against the water, and the wind hushes the reeds. You pause and listen. In the distance, someone plays a guitar. A child recites a school poem. A duck sneezes. A woman calls her dog back to the boat. It's life, in full motion. And beneath all of it, the layers hold. Chinampas built by hands 500 years, gone still cradle vegetables and weddings, spinach and Snapchat. They may not look like they did in the time of Tenochtitlán, but they're not gone. They're just dressed for today. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the lights flicker behind your lids. You breathe in the scent of flowers, tamales, lake water, and maybe just a little bug spray. And when you open your eyes, the garden is still there, waiting. The sky has turned a pale lavender now, that hushed hour when the world catches its breath before nightfall. You paddle slowly, carefully, through the narrowing canals, surrounded by the quiet hum of life winding down. In the fading light, the chinampas look more like dreams than farms soft, glowing patches of green floating in darkening water. And then you see them. Not farmers, not tourists, scientists. 3 people crouched over the edge of a chinampa with headlamps and clipboards. One has a soil sample kit. Another is taking photos of root structures. The third, balanced precariously on a wooden plank, is dipping a long-handled net into the canal. You drift closer. They don't notice you at first, too focused on their work. When one finally glances up, she offers a quick nod and returns to labeling a small bag of mud like it's a treasure. Which, in a way, it is. Because now, after all these centuries, people are finally studying the chinampas not as a quaint relic, not as a tourist attraction, but as a solution. A living model. You tie your canoe to a reed post and step onto the bank to watch. One researcher gently digs into the soil with a trowel, lifts it to her nose, and breathes in. Still alive, she murmurs, smiling. They're not just measuring nutrients or water retention, they're asking bigger questions. How does a system like this stay fertile for centuries? How does it recycle waste without depleting itself? Could we copy this model in modern cities, in flood zones, in food deserts? Historians still debate whether chinampas could scale globally, but ecologists and climate scientists are intrigued. In a world increasingly threatened by droughts, floods, and exhausted soil, the idea of a floating farm that nourishes itself feels almost too good to be true. But here it is. The researchers explain, in between their tasks, how some chinampas are now part of urban agriculture. Pilot programs, places where locals grow food not just for themselves, but for nearby schools, restaurants, even hospitals. They've introduced composting stations, natural filtration systems, and floating gardens designed to clean polluted water. It's not just a revival, it's a reimagining. You walk along a restored chinampa that's part of one such program. It's tidy, but not sterile tools hanging from willow trunks, irrigation tubes hidden beneath soil, a sign that reads, Sembrando futuro con raíces del pasado, sowing the future with roots from the past. A young man waves you over. He's stirring a large compost bin, a mixture of chopped greens, food scraps, and lake weeds. We use everything, he says. No waste, just patience. Nearby, 2 teenagers are checking leaf growth with a smartphone app. One of them points out a tiny white bug, opens a book, and matches it to a sketch of a pest from the 1500s. The margins are filled with notes. One reads, "Ask Abuela what she used for this." The past and present, in conversation. You hear that more schools are bringing students out to the chinampas now, not just for field trips, but for food. Local produce programs, soil workshops, hands-on planting. Children raised in apartment towers learning to paddle, to harvest, to respect dirt. You pass another group this time. Engineers testing a floating platform made from natural fiber mats. They're trying to simulate the original reed frameworks using biodegradable materials. One of them laughs and says, "If we can get this to work in Jakarta, we owe Mexico big time." You smile. The lake ripples. This isn't nostalgia anymore. This is blueprint. You return to your canoe, heart full and mind buzzing. It's easy to think of chinampas as a story that's ending a fading legend. But out here, in the twilight, with soil under fingernails and data in spreadsheets, it feels like a beginning. Not a return to the past, but a rescue mission, a collaboration between ancestors and algorithms. You paddle slowly through a canal where lanterns have been hung from tree branches, their reflections dancing in the water. A chorus of frogs sings somewhere out of sight, and the air is sweet with night-blooming flowers and tamal steam. One of the researchers floats past in a kayak, a headlamp glowing like a firefly. He raises a hand. Still working, you ask. He smiles. Still learning? And so are you. The chinampas were never just about survival. They were about relationship between land and water, between people and plants, between memory and motion. And now, they're a bridge, a floating link between what was, what is, and what might still be. You pause, your paddle resting across your knees. You look out across the moonlit garden beds and think, maybe the lake isn't trying to return to the past. Maybe it's trying to teach us how to float forward. Night has finally settled in, soft and full, wrapping the chinampas in a velvet hush. The moon rises like a silver coin over the water, reflected so perfectly in the canal below that it feels like you're floating between two skies. You exhale, long and slow, letting your breath match the rhythm of the lake. Everything is quieter now, more intimate. Even the frogs have lowered their voices. You guide your canoe gently through the darkened paths. Lanterns flicker on a few chinampas, casting golden circles across the water. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then stops. The lake exhales again. And you drift. No more parties, no more tourists, just you, the water, and the memory of 1,000 seasons. You pull up beside a chinampa where the plants seem to glow in the moonlight. Lettuce leaves gleam like jade, and the corn stalks sway gently, as if breathing. There's no one else around. The only sounds are the lapping water and the soft rustle of willow branches overhead. You climb onto the soil. It's still warm from the day, but softening, cooling. You sit, legs crossed, hands in your lap, and you listen. It's not a sound you can name, really. It's a kind of hum, a feeling, the sense that the earth is turning beneath you, the stars above you, and in between. This little floating patch of life that has outlived empires. You lie back in the soft dirt and stare upward. The sky is littered with stars. You trace constellations between the branches. Maybe that's Orion, or whatever the Aztecs saw in his place. Maybe a jaguar, a maize god, or a warrior with 1,000 names. And below you, the soil remembers. These gardens have seen it all. Hands in prayer, hands planting beans, hands drawing swords. They've hosted weddings and rituals, gossip and ghosts, compost and rebirth, and still, they float. Historians still argue whether chinampas should be called floating gardens, since technically they're built on anchored layers and not buoyant rafts, but floating or not, one thing is certain: they endure. And they teach that productivity doesn't have to mean depletion. That land can be shared and shaped, not conquered. That balance isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You close your eyes. The soil breathes. The canal rocks gently beneath the earth. The willow leaves shiver once, then go still. Somewhere nearby, a duck chuckles in its sleep. You drift on the edge of sleep now, heart slowed, breath even, the chinampa cradles you like a raft, like a memory, like a long-lost lullaby sung in Nahuatl by someone who once planted marigolds under a full moon. The air cools, the lake darkens, and in the silence, you feel it. The floating garden hasn't gone anywhere. It's just been waiting for you to notice. And now, the moon is high, the garden's quiet, and your breath has slowed into something soft and steady. The chinampa you rest upon is no longer just a farm or a field. It's a cradle, a gentle floating fragment of time, holding you in a kind of stillness the modern world rarely allows. The stars blink slowly overhead, like tired eyes finally giving in. The water beneath you laps against the soil in small, rhythmic sighs. Everything around you is old and wise and unhurried. Let your limbs go heavy. Let the names of the gods, the stories of the harvest, the voices of ancient farmers all fade gently into the background. There's nothing you need to do now. No canoe to paddle, no crops to tend. You've walked the rows, felt the earth, tasted the maize. You've heard the gossip and the ghosts, and you've floated through history at the pace of peace. Now, it's time to let go of the water, of the soil, of the sky. Let your thoughts settle like silt beneath the surface. Let your dreams root softly in the fertile bed of memory. You are held here, between trees and stars, in a place that remembers without asking, that grows without rushing, that floats without drifting. There is nothing else to carry tonight, only sleep. The chinampa will hold you. The lake will rock you. And the world will wait until you wake.